Today, we're talking about professional development and online teacher resources. You're listening to the Teacher Tech Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Teacher Tech Podcast. I am Daniel Kelly. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We're talking about professional development and online teacher resources. The Teacher Tech Podcast and show notes can be found at danielkelly.co/teachertech. Check out the website and feel free to add the Teacher Tech Podcast to your favorite RSS feed on iTunes and now on Google Play. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at DanielKellyEDU. I finally figured out what Twitter is for. I had never really used Twitter prior to... A few weeks ago, I started an account specifically for my professional interest and promoting things like the Teacher Tech Podcast. And I really didn't understand the hashtags and how all of that worked and how you're going to get any information across in 140 characters. But I came across something on Twitter this week. It was, I think, Thursday, maybe Friday. And I came across this post that somebody was promoting a model for technology integration, and they were promoting that for teachers along with a workshop. So I was curious because, I mean, anytime there's especially a graphic model for teachers, I think it's great to give them something that when they're designing lessons and figuring out what they're going to do for their class, that they can have this nice visual representation of what they're supposed to be doing. So I was curious, so I clicked on it, and I like most of it. But there's a few things that really struck me as questionable, and that started as a legitimate question. But soon after I asked the question, I started to doubt the intentions of the people that were posting it. And if you check it out on Twitter, again, it's at DanielKellyEDU, you'll see kind of how the conversation went and the reason I'm doing this podcast on this topic this week. What struck me from the conversation was that an innocent question from me, a legitimate, I don't understand something on this graphic, turned into what ended up being a sales pitch from them, and at that point, I stopped having the conversation. One of the things that I learned about Twitter this week, and I really hope that you guys use it, because as I'm discovering Twitter, I'm really realizing the value it has as a platform. My personal stuff is all on Facebook, all my family, friends, probably most of you listening to this are on Facebook. And we, on Facebook, it's a very closed network, if you want it to be. But Twitter allows the hashtag to really be the driving force in how people interact with each other and how they consume media, because there's so many tweets. And that was why I didn't use it to begin with, was because my news feed, when I woke up in the morning, would be 1,800 tweets, and I didn't know how to handle that much new information all at once. But with hashtags, you can really kind of dive into what particular topics you're interested in. And the one that I follow and I post on as much as I can is hashtag EdTech, EDTECH. And I think that is a great place to start to kind of build networks and see what people are using out there. People will ask questions or post things like, Google just put out some new Google form templates and they changed the way they do it, and those resources. And I think that those types of things are really, really useful to teachers that want to bring technology into the classroom, but it's a very big market, and where do you start? If you just Google educational apps, you're already overwhelmed. So back to my conversation with these folks on Twitter, I was debating whether I was going to actually call out this model, because I truly believe in my heart of hearts that all people or most people are good. Their intentions are good, and they don't. They're not out to kind of get somebody. They're not out to pull one over on somebody. But unfortunately, in education, we have a lot of that. We have a lot of people that see it as a space where they can make money, and they don't necessarily have the students' interests at heart, and they may or may not have any training or experience as a teacher. They may have an idea of what they think would work. They may have done some market research, but in the end, it's a product, and it's a product that we're trying to sell to schools, and we're trying to sell to teachers that promote learning or promote higher order learning or more of a 21st century environment, but don't necessarily do any of that. And the reason for that is it's just a program that was developed to make money. There are some out there that are phenomenal. The majority of the really, really good ones are either free or cheap. But as I said in the last podcast about smart boards, we have to, as educators, really think about what we're bringing in, what we're spending our money on. Every dime that we spend on a program or a technology or a workshop or a professional development seminar is money and resources that we are taking away from giving the students a better education. It's one teacher in a building that might reduce class sizes just a little bit to make them a little bit more manageable. So I'm really, really passionate about being careful how we charge for teaching people these different programs and professional development. And I personally, from schools, have never taken anything for that. I think that I'm really kind of altruistic in that, is I want to bring that to people. And that's why I do this podcast, and I certainly am not making any money off this. But I decided to call out this particular model, and because I had the conversation publicly anyways. So what I found was this Padagogy Wheel, Padagogy Wheel. And you can Google that, or I'll have it in the links for the show. And the graphic itself, I find, is a good representation of how to use Bloom's taxonomy in planning lessons or planning units, bringing things into the classroom. And I hope most people listening are familiar with Bloom's. If you're not, it kind of gives these different categories of kind of their cognitive domains is what they are. So at each level, the students are doing more with the information. So they're not just taking that information and regurgitating it. They start to actually do something with the information you give them. So it starts with remembering and understanding, and then it goes to applying and analyzing, and then it goes to evaluating and creation. And in that process, they should be able to take just rote information and go through and actually do something with it. So, for example, under remember, the next category up is action verbs. So when you're creating a lesson or objectives, you can say, for instance, one of them is summarize. And so you can say that students will be able to summarize a text or summarize an idea that you're trying to teach them. But that falls into that remember and understand. Another one is classify. So you'd be able to go through the species and family and phylum, and I'm not a biologist, so I probably just screwed that all up, and all the biology teachers would be yelling at me. But you can classify all of those. But that's not actually doing anything with it. That's not using higher order thinking skills. That's just taking that information, applying it. And then it goes into activities that you can do, which I like. So you can do things with technology, such as bookmark your favorite thing, or subscribing to an RSS feed, or You can comment, or you can create a mind map, which I really, really like, or you can search Google and get that information. So it has that, how you can use technology to fit into that one category of Bloom's taxonomy. But then the next category in the outer, not quite the outermost edge of the circle, but the second to outermost ring is a bunch of apps that supposedly correspond with that category in Bloom's taxonomy. So things in the understand and remember category is Google Docs, Notepad, Keynote, Evernote, Word. Things that are just you can use just to get that information and categorize it or do something with it and store it, so you'll have it for later. But certainly just typing in something in Word isn't going to give you a higher level of thinking, with the end goal being metacognition. So some of this I like. The issue I have is obviously Word can be used to create. No question that you can use that application to do that. And one of the things listed is WordPress. Well, WordPress, that you create a website. It's in that. It's right in kind of the objective and the purpose you would use WordPress for. But those weren't the things that really concerned me. Those were what, kind of got my attention and I was looking at. And if you go to the outer ring of the model, and again, if you can pull it up, it's a visual, and I'm trying to describe it as best I can, but if you see it, you'll know why it's difficult. But the outermost ring is the SAMR model, which is a taxonomy that helps with bringing technology specifically into the classroom. So you start with substitution, go to augmentation, then modification, and then redefining the tasks that you couldn't do before without this technology. And that's really what that model is aimed to do, is to redefine the task because of the technology and really make it so that technology is a pivotal part of the learning. So, for instance, substitution, if you're bringing in a Kindle to read a book versus a paper copy of the book, that you're just substituting one medium for another. You're not actually changing anything about it. You're not giving students an ability or a skill to do it differently. Or to consume that differently in a different way that helps. But if you modify it, say you had links in the Kindle, or I know the iBooks, you can put links in there, and you can click on it and you can get more information. So now you're augmenting that original text with pop-ups or with images. So if they see, you're doing a story on Mark Twain, it says, Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens, and you can pop up the picture and you can actually see who you're talking about while you're doing it. And that can, go for quite a bit, especially in science textbooks or history textbooks, where there's a lot of external information that just can't fit into that particular unit. So both Bloom's and the SAMR taxonomies are incredible. They work well. They're well established. I've used them both myself. I continue to use them as an educator. Really getting to those higher order thinking skills and really getting to using technology in a very progressive way. So when I'm looking at this from that standpoint, this thing's, I love that we're trying to figure out where those apps fit. But I'm looking at some of the apps, and when you go down to analyze in Bloom's, it has Dropbox. And that really caught my eye, as I could make the argument that Word can be used to create, but it's still, you're substituting it for pen and paper. I can see that argument. But Dropbox really didn't do it for me. It didn't show me how are we analyzing using Dropbox? And then I look at they actually have criteria listed as to what the criteria were in the selection of the apps and the placement of them in particular categories of Bloom's. So I look at Analyze, and it says that apps that fit into this category improve the user's ability to differentiate between relevant and irrelevant, and determine relationships and recognize the organization of content. Now, that last one, I might be able to give Dropbox a little bit of props on, okay, it helps recognize the organization of content. But so does a filing cabinet or a folder or any number of basic technologies that don't require the setup that it would take to get Dropbox into a classroom. But beyond that, I don't see how it helps the user analyze anything. I don't see that app helps that. I could see a program like Excel in a category like this, but certainly Dropbox, I think, would belong maybe with Remember. But aside from that, I was really just curious as to how that would have done that. So I tweeted at the original, and I hope I'm using that terminology correctly, because again, new to Twitter, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I tweeted at the original poster or tweeter, I guess, and I just asked the simple question, how does Dropbox fit into this category? And the response I got was, that was a great question, and they tagged the developer of this in that conversation. And later on, I got a tweet back from them explaining, trying to explain it to me, but I didn't really understand what they were saying. And again, follow this conversation on Twitter. It at Daniel Kelly EDU. It'll give you an idea of kind of the defense of this and why eventually I said, I got to do a podcast on this, because I was so kind of fixated on the fact that they couldn't give me a straight answer. And even the original, and I had to tweet him because he wouldn't tweet me directly and get me in that conversation. I tweeted him to ask him what was the story. And they said, well, it's not about the apps, it's about the pedagogy, which I totally understand. It's about the pedagogy, but then why put the apps there? Because we already have these pedagogical tools with SAMR and Blooms, and all you've done is smash some apps. And they, even the original poster said it seems, they're just kind of subjective, and they're in there. There's no, they didn't say there's no specific order, but I think they understood what I was saying. And then as that conversation ended, and it ended with me asking, well, how is a beginning teacher or a teacher new to bringing these tools into the classroom going to understand that those apps can be used literally in every single category? And they said, well, that's what our workshop is for, which turns out I had to Google it because you can't get it on their website, but I found somebody that took their workshop, and it was $1,800 just for the workshop itself, for a 4-day workshop. And I'm really against that type of knowledge and information dissemination, because if you're going to put something like this on Twitter, and then when somebody, and they don't know what I do, I could just be a normal, typical classroom teacher who's trying to understand this stuff, to bring it into the classroom and get information, and they don't give that direct answer to me, and they end with, well, take the workshop. I have a real issue with that, because if you're going to put this out there as a model, I shouldn't need a workshop to understand a simple graphic model that you put on the internet, and you have all the accompanying documentation to go along with it. So what my point and what I really want to get across in this is that as educators, and whether that's a first-year teacher, a student teacher, a 30-year teacher, or those of us that are on the instructional design and coaching aspect more now than classroom teaching, what we really need to do is, when we come across something, is be critical consumers. And I think that we would all teach our students to be critical consumers and say, are we being sold a bill of goods here? Are we actually being given what we think we're being given? And I've done this as a teacher. You look up to people that, especially at the beginning of your career, that are giving keynotes at these conferences, and they're saying, well, I did this and it was great and wonderful. But other than that, they didn't accomplish anything. But we don't know that as that consumer if we don't do the legwork into it. And quite frankly, most teachers and most of us have better things to do, like teach. And when things like these go out into the public and it looks like, oh, I can use a particular application to meet one of these levels of Bloom's. And maybe you're just trying to check that box because your administrator says, I want to see Bloom's taxonomy in your objectives in your class. Or maybe you're genuinely trying to follow Bloom's and to use that in your class. I think that this does that a disservice. I think that having these types of graphics out there do teachers a disservice because we're not helping them be educated consumers, and we're not helping them to bring these apps meaningfully into a classroom. And we're telling them things that sound right because we know the words and we know the jargon and we can claim experience. But the reality is that there are some areas that I hold expertise in, and there are certain areas I don't. There's more areas that I don't hold expertise in than the 4 that I might hold expertise in, and that's pushing it if somebody has 4. Technology is it's been around for a very long time, and in education, we have recently embraced it as a cure-all, as a way to level the field, as a way to have more information at hand to give to our students, to give them better content. And I think what's happened with that is there has been so much development, not just in educational applications, but in general. And then we take those normal applications and we make them educational, or we bring them into the educational sphere. And we often don't do our due diligence. And I certainly was like this as a teacher, where we don't do enough research to see if that is an actually effective technology. And by effective, I mean we are enhancing what the students are learning. We are not just making it a little bit better, but we're substantially changing the way that they receive that information and the type of information they receive, that we are going after that deeper understanding, that metacognition, so that they are actually thinking about themselves learning, not just bringing in a technology because it is easier or it is more fun or more engaging. And I really want this idea of educated consumerism when it comes to these technologies, even though they're free, or even though the district is paying for them, or the principal says, "Oh, I'll give you the money to do that." Are we putting that out there? Are we giving information to our teachers that is worth the money that they're spending? And I don't care if it's them or the district. And I think it's irresponsible for those of us that are giving that information to do it in a way that might not be 100% altruistic. I'm fine with people making money. I understand that that's what has to happen for the whole system to keep working. But it should hold up to basic scrutiny on Twitter. And it should, in 140 character bytes, I should not be able to question something at a level that they can't answer it if they're putting it out. So teachers need to be more careful about that, and principals need to be more careful about that as well, because I have sat through some professional developments that where they were literally misquoting research that I was intimately familiar with. But everybody's like, oh, this is great, and the kids will love it. How do we know? Well, this teacher taught for 20 years. They must know it. And students are susceptible to this, and new teachers are susceptible to this. So if we're teaching this at university levels where we're teaching pre-service and we're showing them things that well, we were taught that and we just took them as gospel truth, and then we're just perpetuating that myth, that idea that something, we were told was right because we trusted the person, and now we're giving that to somebody else who trusts our judgment. And if we're giving professional development advice to people, especially people that have sought out that advice, they are looking up to us. And you, as teachers, are looking up to us and saying, what can I do? How can I bring this technology into the classroom? How can I use this iPad to really get my students learning and get them engaged in the content and take it to the next level? And you're looking to people like me to give you that information. And if we're not giving you the information correctly, or we're doing it for some self-serving motivation, then we're in the wrong. And I want teachers to be critical consumers of professional development and ideas, and get on Twitter and say, hey, what about this? Before you invest any more time in it, can you answer this question? Or does anybody else have an answer to this question? And that's the advantage of social media, is we can do that in real time. We can do that publicly. And I think that it should be done publicly. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misreading this. Maybe the people that I showed it to are misreading it. But I don't think so. And I'm confused by the response that I got as to how I was supposed to be reading this. And it just really brought up that kind of fire in me that says we have to do better, and we have to do better as coaches, and teachers have to do better at making sure that the media and the professional development that they're consuming will help their students, and not just sound like it will help their students. So check it out on Twitter, check it out on Facebook, at Daniel Kelly EDU. I really want to hear from you. I really want to hear what you want to hear about if you're listening to this. And if you have a different opinion on this, let me know and tell me why you think that. So tweet me, I think. Is that what it's called? Tweet me. Get a hold of me on Twitter or on Facebook at Daniel Kelly EDU. And that wraps up episode 4 of the Teacher Tech Podcast. I truly do appreciate you tuning in. Next week, episode 5, we are going to talk about the SAMR model, what I discussed today on the show, and how to use that to bring technology into the classroom and decide what is the best way to do that. I'm also going to be trying something new. I'm going to try to do some live screen capture with that, and I'll have that up on YouTube next week. I want to try out some new technology. But thank you for tuning in. This is the Teacher Tech Podcast.